Szeretettel köszöntjük kedves nézőinket! Az 1956. október 23-ai magyar forradalom 65. évfordulóján. Most visszaidézzük az amerikai-magyar megemlékezések egyik csúcs pillanatát, amikor a 40. évfordulón New York állam magyar származású kormányzója, George Pataki emlékezett vissza 56-ra a polgármester Rudolph Giuliani kastélyában. Az eseményt az amerikai-magyar nagyasszony Lívia Silva és a magyar főkonzul Kovács István közösen szervezték.
Thank you very much, and Mayor Giuliani, thank you for those kind comments. Ambassador Nathan, Consul General Kovács, Commissioner Silva. It is just wonderful to be with you all here this evening. And I have to first begin by thanking Mayor Giuliani, not just for hosting this reception and for issuing the proclamation, but I'm sure some of you are wondering why is it November instead of October 23rd. And the reason was because the mayor wanted me to be here, and on October 23rd I was in Budapest. So I have to thank the mayor for not only hosting this, but for agreeing to change the date so that I could be I was in Budapest because I had to be. And the mayor talked about his feelings in October of 1956 as a 12-year-old boy. He's older than I am. I was 11 in 1956. But I recall with absolute clarity, and will never forget the events of October of 1956, because I lived in Peekskill not just with my parents and my brother, but with my aunts and uncles and cousins and grandparents, and we had in our small farm in Peekskill basically transposed a piece of Szabolcs County to New York State, and we were very proud of the values and the traditions of my grandfather and grandmother's home village and of Hungary. And when we heard of the revolution, we only had one TV set for all the aunts and uncles and grandparents, and we stayed glued in front of that television. And I can remember the flickering black and white images as in those first days, we were so excited and so optimistic as the Hungarian spirit became so evident and their commitment to freedom was so real. And in fact, at the beginning, the Russians had actually pulled out. And we were just so excited that finally our ancestral homeland could be free so that we could visit our relatives and go back and share the experience of freedom. And then just a few days later, of course, all those great hopes and great dreams were crushed by the return of the Soviet troops. And as excited and happy as we were in those first days, we were sad and upset in the final days as you saw young boys, teenagers fighting tanks with rocks and just risking their lives for what we had always taken for granted as Americans, which was the fact that we are free and independent people. And for an 11-year-old boy, it wasn't just something about Hungary, it was something about the government and about freedom. Because growing up in America, you'd always taken it for granted. You had always assumed that freedom was something that everyone was entitled to. You had always assumed that government was a benevolent force that could do good and would be on your side. And for a young boy to see the awesome ability of government to oppress and to destroy and to deny freedom is something that has affected me to this day. And that will always have an impact on my view of government and of people and of freedom. And I know we have with us tonight some of the heads of the freedom fighter organizations and others who were there in 1956. And I had to go back this October because you've won. The October 1956 revolution won. It began the collapse of the Soviet Empire. It showed to not just Americans, but people around the world the evil of communism. And once that became so apparent, it was inevitable that that spirit of freedom, whether it was in Budapest or Beijing, or whether it was in Bratislava or Moscow, ultimately had to triumph. And I made the last 2 years a number of high-profile visits to Hungary, but there's one that no one knew about. In the mid-70s, my wife Libby and I went back to Hungary. We wanted to go see it. We had heard such wonderful stories about Budapest as the Paris of the East and how it was the most free and open city under communism. And we went there. And I lasted one night. For all the economic freedom, for all the shops and the restaurants, you could sense the spiritual despair. You could sense the oppression. You could sense the absence of freedom, the fact that you had not won in the mid-70s. And I vowed that I would not stay beyond the next morning and I would never go back until Hungary was free. Well, since 1989, there has been that success of freedom. We have seen that spirit of the freedom fighters triumph in Hungary. And last year, when I went back for the first time, one of the most moving parts was not just visiting my grandparents' village for the first time, but actually being on the floor of the Hungarian parliament as the debates were going back and forth and the various parties argued and disagreed. And it almost reminded me of the New York State legislature. Except they were far too civil on the floor of the Hungarian parliament. But it was just absolutely wonderful to see that freedom that so many fought for in 1956, that so many died for in 1956, a reality in Budapest, in Hungary, and now in so many countries around the world. So this is a celebration. It's a celebration of the sacrifice of the freedom fighters, but more importantly, it's not just a celebration of the freedom of Hungary. It's a celebration of the ideal of freedom that will triumph all around the world. And when I see, as we saw a few years back, these students in Beijing carrying the effigy of the Statue of Liberty through the squares of Beijing, I thought to myself, these are the heirs to the freedom fighters of 1956. This is 1993, but it's 1956 in Hungary. And just as today, we celebrate the triumph of freedom in Hungary in October of 1956, that someday in the future, we will be celebrating your legacy as freedom expands and exists for all people in all countries all across the world. So Mayor, thank you, and God bless you for holding this. To everyone here, thank you for being a part of it. And let's really have a great celebration for the 50th celebration of the October 19th.
very much, Livia. Governor Pataki, welcome to Gracie Mansion. It's a great honor to have you here. Ambassador Nathan, Council General Kovacs, all of the distinguished guests that are here. This is a very, very important celebration. It's something that we need to remember. At the time of the Hungarian Revolution, I was 12 years old, and it's one of my early memories of the fight against communism. I remember it as if it were yesterday, and I remember the bravery and the determination and the commitment of the Hungarian people. And I remember that but for the fact that the Soviet Union used massive armament against them, they would have overcome during that, their oppressors during that period of time. Rather than being defeated, however, what remained in the minds and the hearts of the Hungarian people was a tremendous desire for freedom and for self-determination and for realizing their heritage in their own country. It was an inspiration to all Hungarians, to all Hungarian Americans, like our distinguished governor and many of you that are here. But I want you to know it was an inspiration to everyone else as well. Virtually everyone alive and probably above the age of about 4 or 5 remembers that. It was one of the great demonstrations of the quest for human freedom. It was one of the great demonstrations of what Ronald Reagan described as the power and oppression of the evil empire. And it had a tremendous impact beyond even Hungary and the Hungarian community. The fact that ultimately freedom prevailed is a testament to the strength and to the enduring qualities of the Hungarian people, a civilization and a culture that goes back well over 1,000 years. It's a great honor to be here, have you all here in Gracie Mansion to remember what turned out to be a great event for human freedom, really because of the Hungarian people. So thank you for being here. It's my honor to present first to the Ambassador and the Consul General this proclamation, and then one of the most distinguished members of the Hungarian-American community, who has risen to one of the highest offices in the land. And I'm sure, as he will tell you, in large part because of what he learned in his family, what he learned from his father, and many of the traditions and the values that make Hungarians in America and all over the world some of our leading citizens. But first, the proclamation. 40th anniversary of the Hungarian Revolution is being celebrated in our city and throughout the world. Hungary has a long and distinguished history. The Hungarian state was founded by the Magyars, who formed a federation known as, you're going to have to pronounce that for me, Onugur? Onugur. 1,100 years ago. The word Hungarian comes from the pronunciation of Onugur. Hungarians have always been great lovers of the arts. The country is known for its fine composers, its musicians, its dance, literature, poetry, porcelain, architecture, food, and wine. After 1945, Hungary could not freely choose its natural political path and was a victim of the bipolar politics of the period. Opposition spread and strengthened. On October 23, 1956, security forces fired on Budapest students, and the people rose up. Soviet troops poured into Hungary and launched a massive military attack. Soldiers and civilians fought in the streets. Some 200,000 Hungarians fled to the west. Many, thank goodness, to New York City. Throughout the nation, there were demonstrations, revolutionary committees sprang up, and workers' councils were elected. There was a general political strike. Red stars and Soviet war memorials were torn down. The country united on 3 demands: national independence, a civil democratic political structure, and protection of social benefits. The revolution and the refugees focused the world's attention on Hungary. The West supported Hungary, and these events began Hungary's long journey to freedom. In 1990, multi-party democratic elections were held. Since then, Hungary has further developed its democratic institution and is finding its rightful place in the democratic family of nations. Now, therefore, I, Rudolph W. Giuliani, Mayor of the City of New York, in recognition of this very important anniversary, do hereby proclaim Monday, November 25, 1996, in the City of New York as Hungarian Revolution 40th Anniversary Day. It's a particular honor to have the governor here as a representative, certainly, of the Hungarian American community and all that that means and all that that represents. But even beyond that, he is the governor of by far the most important state in the United States. He's made changes in this state that had eluded others in the past because of his courage, his vision, his determination. And he is a very, very wonderful man to work with, to know, to be a friend of. Whenever I've called upon him with things that were necessary for the city of New York, he has always evaluated on the merits. And when he could do it, he did. And when he couldn't, he explained why, and you could move forward. And something that isn't always true, he's always kept his word. This is a really exceptional person. He's someone that the Hungarian American community should be very proud of. He's somebody all New Yorkers should be proud of. I claim him in part for the Italian American.
Az eseményen beszédet mondott az Amerikai-Magyar Szabadságharcos Szövetség alapító elnöke, Lovas György.
Well, Honorable Mayor Giuliani, Honorable Governor, I would like to say it first time in Hungarian. Papaki György. Ladies and gentlemen, 4 years ago, on October the 23rd, 1956, we lost 35,000 Hungarian freedom fighters on the streets of Budapest and the other parts of Hungary. Thousands and thousands came out. Tens of thousands went to concentration camps. They were thrown there by the Soviet dictatorship. At that time, the West and the free world did not help us. They recognized our fight, but they did not help us. And ladies and gentlemen, today, our freedom fighters who died 40 years ago, they can look down at us. And from the bottom of my heart, in the name of all the Magyars, the Hungarians, having that honor to have here among us celebrating the 40th anniversary of the Hungarian Revolution and uprising, the two brightest stars in American politics today, Honorable Governor George Pataki and Honorable Mayor Giuliani, the two biggest statements in the United States today. It's the greatest honor for us, and thank you both of you.
A 42. évfordulón a szabadságharcos Márer György konferálta be a 12 éves Apatini Lízát, aki a forradalom idején is népszerű népdalt adott elő.
Hölgyeim és Uraim, most pedig valamennyünk kedvence, a kis Apatinyi Liza, aki épp tegnap éppen tegnap töltötte be 12. életévét.
Ha én rózsa volnék, nem csak egyszer nyílnék, minden évben 4-szer virágba morulnék. Nyílnék a fiúnak, nyílnék én a lánynak, az igaz szerelemnek és az elmúlásnak. Ha én kapu volnék, mindig nyitva állnék, akár honnan jönne, bárkit beengednék. Nem kérdezném tőle, hát téged kiküldött, akkor lennék boldog, ha mindenki eljött. Ha én ablak volnék, akkora nagy lennék, hogy az egész világ láthatóvá váljék. Megértő szemekkel átnéznének rajtam, akkor lennék boldog, ha mindent megmutattam. Ha én utca volnék, mindig tiszta lennék, minden áldott este fényben megfürödnék, és ha engem egyszer lánckerék taposna, alattam a föld is sírva beomolna. Énekeljük együtt. Ha én zászló volnék, sohasem lobognék, mindenféle szélnek haragosa volnék, akkor lennék boldog, ha kifeszítenének, s nem lennék játéka mindenféle szélnek. Köszönöm szépen!
Kedves nézők, az 56-os magyar forradalom híradóiból vett fotómontázzal búcsúzunk. Viszontlátásra a jövő héten!